Hello and welcome to Paul Taylor Class Lessons, How to Make a Basic Rig, Part 2. If you just watched Part 1, you saw we finished building the neck and the can. I'm now going to start making the down tube, attach that, and then we'll make the 10 mil joint, attach that, and then maybe put a horn or two on there. So let me show you how we do. Get this camera set up here. And I'm going to start with a 12 millimeter tube here, just like before. And I'm going to coil a small amount of Blue Dream and puff that into an even bubble. And then I'll stretch it, taper it down, roughly 9 millimeter, a little bit smaller, smaller than the diameter of this tube. And that'll be our down tube. And then from there, I'll do a small puffed out Maria towards the end, which will be where it attaches on the lip. And then we'll do a bend, pop our holes, and then we'll be able to put this into the rig. So now that I've rambled through that, let's get started. I'm just gonna pop a hole in the end of this tube here. Just gonna tear off that excess glass, make sure it's even, and then I'll heat it up and pop a little hole. All right, now that I got it flared out just a tiny bit, take a rod of Blue Dream. And since I'm tearing off the area where it connects here, and I don't have to worry about it, I'm not gonna bother tearing off the end of this rod of Blue Dream because the little bubbling on the end won't be part of the piece. So I'll just do a coil using maybe about a quarter of the rod. Not too much. This down tube doesn't have to be too large. Now I'll close up the end, tear it off. And now I'm just gonna puff this gather into an even ball, melt out all those lines from the coiling. And since it's so small, roughly the width of my flame, I don't need to worry about handles or anything. I can melt it all just with a few heats. Just back and forth, heating it, letting it condense, and then puffing it back out again. Just make sure to always keep it turning and keep it on center. And there you go, it's melted nice and smooth now. I'm gonna heat the entire thing, touch the end with the handle here, make sure the heat is even, and then I'll take it out of the flame and just give it a gentle stretch. Just trying to slowly pull it, keep it on center. And now I'm gonna focus with the small flame. Here, let me turn this down. I'm gonna heat the top, or I'm gonna heat, I guess, the area where it attaches to the blow tube and pull it down a little bit tapered there so I have a defined section from where my color meets the clear. You'll see why that's important in a second. So you can see it's kind of tapered down there, and I still have a little bit of a bulge at the top of the color. So I'm gonna heat, let me turn it like this. I'm going to heat right here, just this part below that taper, and I'm gonna puff this out a little bit wide. It's not quite a Maria. I'm gonna, put a little bit of pressure inward and puff it out, but I don't want it to become a true Maria. Kind of just a puffed out little round ball. All right, so there you see it. It's kind of puffed out a bit and then tapers down. I'm now going to about maybe 25% down, heat it up. So like right here, I'm gonna heat that up and give it a bend and a puff, just so it has a little bit of an angle going down into the rig. Just make sure all sides are getting the heat even. Once it starts to move, just take it out, bend and puff at the same time. Now that I have my little bend, tap off my handle. Starting to be a down tube. And now I know this is too long for the rig, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna focus the heat on the bottom and tear that off, and then I'll puff it back out so it's an even inside wall. Just gonna tear off that excess glass. Make sure it's nice and appropriately sized. Now I'm gonna heat that entire bottom. Make sure the heat is even throughout all sides, and then just gently puff. I don't want it to become wider, I just want the wall thickness to even out. So you can see right there, it's nice and hollow at the bottom. I'm now gonna focus a pinpoint flame on one side, pop a hole out, and then on the opposite side, pop a hole out. All right, for small rigs, I like to do a 2-hole perk. Everyone's different. Some people like a bunch of holes. Some people like just 1 hole, so it gives big chugging bubbles. I like 2-hole. It's a little bit in between fizzing and bubbling, but everyone's different. So now I'm just gonna flash the whole thing in the flame, make sure it's not cooling down on me. And I'm gonna grab the rig, put this inside that hole, make sure it's nice and good fit. And then I'm going to heat where this bulged out part at the top meets the rim of the hole on the rig, and just tack it on 2 sides. Make sure it's at least connected on 2 sides. Then I'll remove this blow tube, and then we'll go in with a small flame and melt it smooth around the whole rim, and then we'll pop the hole out of the end. We just want to make sure it's all one solid piece of glass and not 2 pieces of glass put together. All right, whenever we take a piece from the kiln, it's important to just remove any dust from the kiln. I like to use a piece of cardboard or a magic card. So now, I'm gonna see if it fits. And it does not. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna flare the hole open a little bit wider. Just heating the rim and going in with the reamer and just flaring it open a little bit. See if I can find, where's my bigger reamer? Let's see if that works. Nope, sure doesn't. So I'm just gonna heat it one more time and give it a gentle taper, or just expand the hole with the reamer. Tiny, tiny bit. So close. See if that works. There we go. All right, so now I'm gonna just tack onto the rim here on at least 2 sides to make sure it stays straight. And now I'm going to remove this blow tube. Just going to heat it on all sides and tear it off. All right, so now you can see it's very sloppy, but I've got the down tube connected into the rig. So I'm just going to make sure I'm going to go through and heat all sides of that connection. I'm going to go down into a small hot flame. If you have a hand torch, this is when you want to pull it out and use your hand torch. But I'm going to show you just doing it on a table torch, because I know a lot of people out there only have a table torch. So rather than getting into any specific tools that you may not have, You can just go and in a small pinpoint flame, heat the entire rim and make sure it's melted in and it's all one piece. And most importantly, make sure you're not keeping your rig angled in one direction and allowing the down tube to just fall and tack on one side. So you can see right here, got the down tube in there, it's looking good. The down tube is not touching any of the walls or bottom, which is important because that can end up shocking the piece. So now that this connection on the front is melted in, I'm gonna heat just the center and pop a hole out going through the down tube. So in that pinpoint flame, I'm just heating that closed off area right there that we just connected. Popping a hole out. And now I will go in with the reamer and flare that open a bit. All right, so there you can see we've got a hole popped open from where the down tube is connected. I'm gonna put this in the kiln and we're gonna make our 10mm joint and attach it. Grab some water. Let's get going. Okay, so I'm gonna grab that 12mm tube that we were just using for the down tube. I'm gonna clean off the end, just tear off the excess glass. And like always, I'm gonna pop a hole and flare it out a little bit and then do a coil pot off that. All right, let's see what we got here. We've got this other 3/4 of a rod of Blue Dream left over from the down tube. I'm gonna coil that, as much of this as I can, and we'll turn that into our 10mm banger hanger joint. So starting at the rim, heating just the rod of color, keeping your hands in the same position, but spinning your rods at an even rate. Coil up your glass. And I don't want this tapered out too wide, so I'm just gonna kind of focus in between the outer rim and the top. And then once it, right there, it just got to the width I want, so I'm gonna focus right on the rim now. I'm just coiling my way up, trying to use as much of this rod as possible. I may end up tearing some off, but I want to make sure I have enough glass to make the joint, along with the little bottom of it that'll connect to the rig. And now that I'm getting towards the end, I'll just close it off. Start coiling up on the inner rim and it'll start to taper down small and we'll tear it off. Just get that heated up there. So now we've got a nice little gather here. I'm gonna heat the entire thing as always, give it a few puffs of air, go back and forth and just melt all the lines out so it's a nice smooth even bubble. And then I'll give it a little bit of a stretch just to taper it just by eye roughly to 10 mil. And then we'll use our datum tool, our datum joint former, to get it to a perfect 10 mil joint. Just gonna roll the side on the paddle, kind of roll it down into a cylinder again. All right, now that I've got it tapered down to a cylinder, I'm gonna attach a handle on the end, and just like we did on the top of the down tube, I'm gonna pull out, I'm gonna heat right where the color and the clear meet and pull it down kind of tapered thin, just so I know of the defined area where the two meet and where I gotta pull off and finish my shaping for the bottom of the joint. So I'm gonna attach a handle on the end. Make sure it's on center. I'm gonna let it cool off on center. Now I'm just gonna heat where the color and clear meet. Make sure it's melted in even, and then I'll stretch it. Not really stretch it, I'll just give it a gentle little pull and just taper it a little bit where the clear and the color meet. I don't want to say stretch because I don't want you to think that I'm pulling it long and thin. I'm kind of just giving it a gentle taper. I just want to have a defined area where the clear and the color meet so I know the exact amount of glass I can use for this. See right there, we got it kind of pulled down to a taper. Now I'm just going to heat kind of right around the middle, get it hot and give it a gentle stretch, kind of turning it into a peanut. But I'm keeping the top side, the side that's going to be the 10 mil joint, a little bit bigger than the bottom. I'm now going to heat the bottom side, the bubble closest to my blow tube here. Get the heat nice and even through all sides and just puff it round. Just one gentle puff of air to round it out. And just keep it on center, let it cool off. And then I'll remove this handle off the end here and we'll pop a hole and we'll start using the joint former and start making ourselves a little 10 mil joint. So now I'm just going to pop a hole in the end. I'll just tear up, there's a little bit of clear glass left from the handle, I'm going to remove that. Now I'm just going to heat that end there, get it nice and evenly hot, and pop a hole. Now we'll use our reamer to flare it open. Now I just want to flare it wide enough so I can get the joint forming tool inside, and then we can taper it down smaller to the correct size. Let's switch to the larger reamer. Now I'm just going to roll it on the paddle to just by eye, roughly bring it down to 10 mil, and then we'll bring the tool in. I just want it a little bit bigger than 10 mil so I can get the tool inside. See, there you go. Open in the end. Now, the way this works is you put this inside here, you get this ripping hot, you put it inside, you press these, and you spin it. And it'll create that ridge and make the inside a perfect 10 mil. And it'll take a couple times going back and forth to the tool to get it nice and true. And always make sure when you're done to go in once it's cooled with the tool and make sure it's a clean, nice fit. So I'm just gonna get that whole top ripping hot. Put in the tool, gentle pressure, and spin it. And once the glass cools off, you can see that after the first press, it kind of started it. Gonna just repeat that process, honestly like 5-6 times until I get it nice and true. We're getting there. think once more and we'll have a nice little joint here. All right, now I'm just gonna go through, kind of flame polish the surfaces, make sure that any tool marks are buffed out. And now I'm just gonna let it cool off for a few seconds. Stiffen up, keep it turning though, because you don't want it to distort. And then I'm gonna go in, right now while it's still a little hot, I'm just gonna go make sure it fits. Let's see what we got. Still a little loose. So I'm gonna go back in and give it another press or two. Now I'm just going to, again, buff out, kind of flame polish any little marks left from the tool. Give it a few seconds to cool off, and we'll check it with the tool and see if it fits. I like it. Now I'm just going to go through second flame polish because I saw a little buff mark. Now I'm just going to let this cool off for a few seconds. Let it stiffen up, and then I'll use a bowl push to plug the end here, and I'm going to pop a hole right in the side of this little bubble at the bottom. So let's give this a few seconds to stiffen up and cool down. Going to check the connection. I like it. So now I'm going to plug the end with the bowl push and pop my hole out in the side here. And now I'm going to try, emphasis on try, flare it out to roughly the diameter of the hole where the down tube comes out of the rig. So when we attach these two, we have a nice even seal between these two holes. You don't have one small hole attaching to over top a large hole. You have two perfect size holes attaching to each other, in theory. So you can see we got that hole on the bottom. I'm now gonna flash the whole thing in the flame, not to get it hot, but just to kind of even the temperature. Then I'll attach a handle, a temporary handle right on the lip up here. If I were making a large, more elaborate rig that's going to have a lot of attachments on it, what I would do is I would take a 10mm joint, cover it in carbon, just like in the flame, like a large carbon flame, just get it covered in soot, and then put that joint inside here, attach a handle to that, and then use that as a bridge. That way we can keep our hole plugged while we're doing other attachments, and then we can just take that joint out at the end. But since I'm not doing any more attachments, and besides maybe one or two small horns, and it's a small rig, I'm just going to punty up to this and attach it right on. And we'll be able to plug the hole with the bowl push at any point that we need to puff out air. So on small rigs, that's doable. It's something I like to do, so. And hey, I'm the one teaching, so I'm showing you how I do it. But yes, in an ideal situation with a larger rig, something more elaborate, I do suggest using a glass joint covered in carbon to kind of plug your hole up while you're working. But a small rig like this, I don't see it being an issue. So I just removed the handle off the bottom there. Now I'm tearing off the excess glass, and I'm just going to melt that bottom smooth. There we got a little joint. I'm going to now grab the rig from the kiln, and we're going to slap this puppy on. I'm now going to cut down to a small hot flame. and heat both sides. Heat the rim of both holes and attach that once they're both ripping hot. Make sure they're on center. Oh, there we go. Handle popped off, but that's cool. It happens to the best of us. I'm just gonna pull my joint off there a little bit. And now I'm just gonna heat that connection between the two and get it as smooth as I can. Right now, since my handle popped off, I'm using my tweezers to straighten it. But in an ideal situation, I would just be straightening it with the handle. So there we have it attached. I'm now going to let it cool off a couple seconds. I'm going to flame polish that little mark where our handle was on the lip. Get that done while the connection there is cooling. And now I'm gonna go in and just focus on one side at a time. Right now I'm gonna just heat up the top of that connection. Go in both sides, make sure it's nice and smooth. I don't wanna heat the entire connection because I don't want it to start flopping and moving on me. So I heat that one side, let it melt in smooth, let it stiffen up, and now I'll heat the bottom side and get it melted in. Almost there. Just keep it on center. It's the name of the game. Yeah, and there you have it. That's essentially a rig right there. So now what I'm gonna do, go up to a larger flame here, just kind of flash the bottom of this can. Gonna use another rod of Blue Dream, and I'm just gonna heat up a nice size gather here. And since we're working with a cut rod, I'm gonna tear off the end because it looks a little sloppy. And I'm just gonna heat up maybe 1 inch or so of this rod into a small gather, and I'll attach that to the back of the rig, you know, right behind the joint there. And then melt it in smooth so the connection is even, and then pull it into a little point just like we did the ones up on the top. Now I'm just gonna go and make sure that connection between the two is nice and even. Don't want a sloppy connection on this, especially because it's all transparent colors, because any blemish will show. But also a bad connection is prone to breaking, not just breaking off after the piece is made, but causing the piece to crack, because it's essentially a weak point where the stress will be focused. When the piece starts to cool down, it'll want to separate. So make sure your connection is nice and even. Now I'll heat it, give it a little stretch, and then heat it again, and pull it up. Tear that off. Now I'll just clean up the tip a little. Now I'm just going to flame polish the inside of the bend. Take out that little D-bit. And there you have it. That is a basic little rig right there. Normally I would then throw this in the kiln for 20 minutes and just let it even out in temperature. That way I can take it out and I know it's not going to break on me or anything when I remove the mouthpiece. But since we're recording this and I'm not, you know, Martha Stewart with the finished one in the kiln that I can switch out, like, you know, opening ovens and be like, look, the pot roast is already done. We've got one here. So yeah, what I'm gonna do is just throw this whole thing in a nice bushy propane flame for a couple minutes while I just talk to you and we let this thing even out in temperature. Right now I'm just covering it in soot, getting the whole thing just carboned up, and we'll be able to look at that covered in carbon and notice any blemishes or imperfections, more so than if it were just the transparent reflective glass. So right now, not only are we getting it ready to view before we take it off and make sure it doesn't have any surface blemishes that were hidden, we're also evening the temperature on the entire piece So hopefully, you know, knock on, here's a wooden handle, knock on that wood, it shouldn't break on us. It shouldn't have any reason to break. So as long as the temperature's even and our connections are even, we should be fine. So you can see it's now covered in carbon, blacked out. But we can look at that, we can look down in the flame, and if there were an imperfection, you'd be able to see it because everything is just blacked out. But I'll be honest, I think it looks great right now. So yeah, there you have it. Now let me just, yeah, I think that's good. So what I'm gonna do now is grab my claw grabber, handy dandy claw tool. I'm gonna flash that in the flame for a few seconds because I don't want the cold metal to stress out the bottom of the glass here. So I don't wanna get these red or anything, but I just wanna gently warm them up. Drop down to my small flame. So what I'm gonna do is clamp straight onto the bottom, make sure it's even, make sure it's tight, and then tighten my nut, and focus the flame right at the top of that Maria. Tear off the rod, and now I'm gonna go with my tweezers and just pick off as much glass as I can going up to the top of the Maria so I can have a nice flat top. And then I'll use a rod of glass here to pick it open. So now that I have it pulled off and it's kind of thin glass up top, we'll just heat that hole, poke on, poke off, pop it open. Now I'm just heating it, making sure it gets round, gets even. Gonna use the reamer just a little to make sure it's flared. And now I'm gonna use my paddle to flatten the top and make sure it's an even flat lip. When I do that, it makes the hole a little bit smaller, but we can just flare that out. Go back a couple times, get a nice and clean mouthpiece on this. I notice all too much people make, you know, sometimes people make a great rig, but it'll have a little sloppy mouthpiece. I've done it myself, so, you know, I try to just focus on getting those little things nice and clean. And I like doing transparent colors for that reason, because they make me push myself. You know, there's no way to hide it. No way to hide a blemish in Blue Dream. So there you have it. Holes open on the end, rig is done, and voila. So I'm gonna throw this in the kiln and then talk for a moment, go over again the basic steps. So what I like to do with this is just flash my tweezers, just so they don't shock the piece. Take it off here, grab it by something, and I'll walk it to the kiln. All right, well, there you have it. So that's the basic way that I make a, you know, my basic rigs. That's pretty much just the coil pop method. You can make them a little bit faster by using color tubing or clear tubing, and basic shaping. You can really go wild with it. You can do hammers or whatever, you know, old school style pipes, but use this method to make your down tube in your joint, and hopefully you'll have some success with it. So I know a lot of people have been asking for this lesson, and it's been hard for me to kind of break it down for the time length for these videos. I can see right now I only have a couple minutes left before the video ends up being a little too long. So glad it worked out. I hope you all like it. And as always, if you have any questions, just shoot me a DM on Instagram and I can go through any of the steps here step by step with you. And I'll go through them again real quick. Start by, on the end of your 12 mil tube, coil up one rod of color, puff it into an even bubble and stretch it down to roughly 12 millimeters, same as your blow tube. Do a solid Maria in the top section. When I say top, the section closest to your blow tube. Do a Maria there, but leave a little bit of a bulbous section of glass underneath it. You can puff that out into just a round ball, into a donut. You can leave it kind of just as is, whatever you prefer. Pop a hole in the bottom of that, coil up 2 rods of color, puff them out even, shape it into your preferred can if you want it kind of triangular tapered, or just a round ball, or in between, which is kind of what I did. Make sure your heat is even throughout the whole thing when you're doing it. Otherwise you'll have one side blow out a little bit faster or slower than the other side. And then once you're confident with your shaping, flatten the bottom. And like I said earlier, you want to focus your heat, keep it horizontal, focus your heat on the bottom, and allow gravity to flatten it so it remains thick. And then you can go in and just true it up, flattening it, making sure it stands straight on the paddle. And then from there, you pop your hole where you want your down tube. You put your piece in the kiln to stay hot. On another 12 mil tube, you'll coil up maybe a quarter of a rod of color, puff it out into an even, clean ball, and then pull that into maybe a 9 mil tube, depending on your size. And then you'll make that little ridge at the top. Make sure that's a little bit wider than the rest of the tube you pulled. Then you do a bend just beneath it, tear off any excess glass off the bottom so you have the right length. Puff that out so it's an even diameter on the inside, on the bottom, and then pop 2, 3, 4, however many holes you like, and get that ready. Then you drop that down into your piece, make sure it's tacked on at least 2 sides of the wall, and then you can melt that rim nice and smooth, remove your blow tube, and then pop a hole out in the end there. And while you're doing that, while the tube is in there, make sure you're not just keeping it angled one way while you're heating it, because your tube will just start dropping with gravity. So you want to keep flipping it from side to side so your down tube is centered in your piece. Then once you have that centered, looking good, you'll heat the end of it, pop a hole out where it comes to the surface there, flare that open to your desired diameter. And then you can go and use the rest of that coil, or the rest of that color rod, to coil up your 10 mil or 14 mil or whatever size joint you're doing. Coil up your pod, use your joint shaping tool, pop your hole in the bottom, attach that puppy, and just go through. If you have a hand torch, definitely use it to heat that connection, make sure it's nice and clean. If you don't, you can see how I did it by just angling and taking your time going one side, let it cool and stiffen up, and then go to the other side and go back and forth a few times. And then when that's all ready, you can put your attachments on, and then depending on how quickly you work, you can put it in the kiln, let it kind of even out temperature, or you can just go into that bushy propane flame like I did and get it nice and soft and nice even temp. And you get the added bonus of having that matte surface from the carbon, which will show you any imperfections so you can clean them up before you finish the piece. And then from there, you're good to go. Just grab it with your claw or your tongs or whatever grabber you use. I like the claw grabbers, but everyone's got their preferred tool for that. And then just go and remove the blow tube, and just like you're doing the mouthpiece on a pipe, you pick it open with a rod, make sure it's nice and even and smooth, and it's ready to rock. Throw it in the kiln. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked the lesson, and I just want to say I couldn't be doing this without you and without your support. So everyone watching this, I really, from the bottom of my heart, cannot thank you enough. You're making this dream come true here. So I'm really excited to see what you make, and just looking forward to seeing what all these rigs you guys come up with. Have a good one.